Welcome to International Schools Podcast. I'm your co-host, John Mickton. Dan is traveling this week. One of the things with the International Schools Podcast, we cover a lot of different topics. And just recently, we kind of also spent some time on the environment, which I think is really important. But something else that we all do every day in schools is we go to the cafeteria. Some faculty eat at school, some people bring their food to school, but many, many kids around the globe in international schools are interacting with cafeteria food and different cultures have different relationships with food and different perspectives. And I just think it's so interesting how food is really part of the tapestry of the way we live, what we enjoy. It brings families together, brings friends, there's celebrations, and food is really an integral part of our day to day. Today, we really have the privilege of having Julia Olayanju, who is running an organization called FoodNiche-ED, and they're based out of the United States. And what we wanted to do with Julia is kind of explore this topic of food and how schools and educators and what are some of the observations, some of the patterns, maybe some of the research that we're noticing regarding food. Because I think even though we're eating it every day for most of us that are fortunate enough to have food on our plate, but also that thinking about schools and kids and faculty and how schools manage that big workflow. So, Julia, first of all, a very warm welcome to our podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure for me to be here. I love being here. Thank you for having me.
And so, Julia, tell us a bit about Food Niche ED and more about your journey in starting this because you're a scientist. You've studied both at Harvard and Rutgers, and your specialty is really food and microbiology as one of the areas. But I'd be curious, how did you suddenly start a school platform focused on food and your own journey? Because you originally come from Nigeria, so it'd be nice to hear that journey.
All right. Thank you so much. Yes, it's there's been a lot in that space of time from when I left high school to where we are now. And for me, right from the get-go, one thing has always been at the forefront. I love helping people, and one of my missions, even from a very young age, when I thought of a career in the sciences, was how can we help people live healthier lives? Now, you could have a broad idea, like I want to help people live healthier lives, but how? So there are many angles this could go on. So anyway, I decided to go on for graduate studies in uh, molecular biology. And one of the things that I had in mind when I was going in was I want to get involved in cancer research. And going into cancer research, of course, I wasn't thinking about food at the time. I was just curious about what can we do to help people navigate the journey when they've been diagnosed with cancer and get to the other side successfully. What are some of the questions we can ask that will help find a cure? So that was what I went in with. But I became curious about food early on in my career, mainly because of my father. My father had some medical challenges and he was on a special diet. And as a geneticist, I always notice when there are changes in expression phenotypes. We call it phenotype, but that's just your physical expression of your medical condition. So with my dad, I noticed that when he hits, sometimes there's just very swift change in his extremities. And I got curious. I started asking myself, what's going on here? So I started talking to people, started talking to investigators. Oh, I really want to get into research with food. And as things would happen, one established investigator reached out to my team at the time, and they had a problem. They were trying to figure out who could help. My mentor at the time was an expert in the field, so my mentor forwarded the email to me and said, "Well, you're the one that's curious about food. If you like this, it's all yours." So I read the research focus and description, and oh, this is really interesting. I want to be involved. And that was how I got into the research. And the research was really focused on some compounds we find in food, specifically cruciferous vegetables. It's a class of vegetables such as Brussels sprouts. Some of you might be familiar with Brussels sprouts. And there are other ones that are common with countries such as India, Pakistan, like moringa. They all belong to that class. Broccoli, they all belong to this category called cruciferous vegetables as well. So we were really focused on understanding a bioactive compound found in this class of vegetable called isothiocyanate. So we wanted to study to know, number one, the anti-cancer properties of this group of compounds. We wanted to know how effective are they as anti-cancer agents and what are their mechanism of action. So I spent 2 years focused on that study, and we learned a lot from it. And that was one thing that really opened my eyes to the world of food. Before then, I just thought of food for something I eat for my pleasure and just to be energized to do everything I have to do every day. I never thought of food as I started thinking about food after my exposure to researching food. I think of food as something that can help us live healthier lives because these food choices that we make every day can power us in unique ways because they have different compounds embedded in them that can add value to us on different levels that most of us were not aware of before now. And one of the things for me as a child growing up, I wasn't really informed about food. And my choices were just based on what I know. I want something pleasurable and I go for something pleasurable. But after knowing, I started thinking differently. I think of things that enrich me, things that help my digestive system work properly, things that could be rich in antioxidants that would help my cells fight free radicals and be stronger. So I started thinking about food differently. And I thought about young children. What if we leverage science and help them understand why their food choices matter? If you're a parent or if you're someone that worked with kids for any length of time, one thing you will know is this. When you tell a child to do something, the next question is why? So we tell them, eat vegetables, eat this. The next question is why? So we decided that we can leverage science. We don't have all the answers, but we know enough about the science of food and health to be able to educate the next generation to make intelligent food choices that will build them up for a healthier future. So that's why we decided to create Food Niche. Now, one of the key things is when you are teaching kids about when you're teaching kids about things like this, that something they care deeply about, and something that outside of the classroom, outside of school, people talk about it in different ways because there's a lot of marketing going on to entice them or attract them to some of these foods that are not particularly so good for them. So we have to figure out a way that we make this really engaging. So we have animation videos, we have activity sheets, and it's also gamified so that it's fun. They feel like coming back to do more. So those are some of the elements we integrated with Food Niche. But in terms of our journey to creating this platform, it's based on experiences and knowledge, knowing that we can help the next generation. And for us in the US, 20% of children in America is considered obese. And this is
Wow.
three times the numbers that were reported by CDC, and that is the Center for Disease Prevention and Control, in 3 decades ago. So we have an upward trajectory that is not desirable. So it calls for a need to help children understand why their food choices matter. And that's why we brought Food Nature to the marketplace.
Fantastic story. And I love the whole way that you were turning it from a personal journey. You were telling us about your father and then the cancer research, and then the type of foods that you were noticing and their properties, and then that connection. It's just so nice. And also, when you think of it today, I know a lot of parents, being an educator and in our own cafeteria and in other schools I've been in, there are a lot of kids that struggle to eat. They have their niche foods that they will eat and they won't eat anything else. And there's sometimes quite a lot of, I'm going to use the word fussiness. I'm wondering, Julia, when you think of you mentioned the CDC saying that 20 years ago it was far less, and now it's a trajectory upwards, 20%. You were mentioning. I'm curious, what have you noticed in parent and teachers, and just generally kids? How are they changing with their ideas on food? What have been some of the things that maybe have got us where we have this obesity, we have kids that are really difficult with their food choices. We have many more allergies. I'm wondering, is there some things that you have noticed in your work with Food Niche Ed?
Yes, so one of the key things that we've noticed, really based on research, just reading more on this problem, is that a lot of priorities have shifted. So in some schools where people talk a lot about food and there's food education, some have scaled back over time. So what we had 30 years ago, it's a little bit different from what we have now. So one of the things CDC published as well is that uh, compared to the 40 to 50 hours recommended for behavioral change, 40 to 50 hours of food education that is recommended for behavioral change, we have less than 8 hours per year. So that is a significantly small amount of exposure for those kids in terms of what they know. And food education is considered a very integral part of a robust education. So if we have less information being shared with students about food and their health, then we can't be surprised that they are not making intelligent choices when it comes to food and health. Also, parents are busier. So you have busy parents at home, they're looking for something convenient. And that exposes kids also to not not the best options when it comes to food. So some of the things that we integrate with Food Niche-ED is resources for parents as well. So when we have activity prompts, we have something for the parents as well, so that they are involved in the students' learning journey, and they together with their children can make better choices at home.
It's interesting how you bring up the parents and how they have to be kind of partners in this relationship, in this education, because
Mhm.
I so often what happens in school and home are two very different things. And I love the
Mhm.
approach that you have, having spent time on your website. There are a lot of parent resources which kind of, supplement what you're suggesting. What's interesting is that you target only K through 8. And I'm wondering, is that where you're going to really change the habits? Is it past 13? It's a bit too late to change people's habits for eating, or it requires more discipline? Is it much better at a younger age to get kids to start think differently? And do you think that also influences parents then at home?
Right. Okay. So I'll just take those questions one at a time. So yes,
Sorry.
I don't know, it's okay. So we have K through 8 currently. We're relatively new, and we plan to still expand to 12. One of the key things that we're doing is that we believe that the earlier you start, the better. And we want to focus more on helping that demography start early and gain traction with that. And then we'll also expand to programming for high school. So programming for high school has to be engineered in a way that can resonate with them, because at this point they're older, they are some of them are set in their ways in terms of what they eat and how they eat. So targeting them is a little bit different than the younger ones. We need to see, okay, what are their interests? How can we integrate our content with their interests? So for instance, someone that's an athlete, they care so much about optimal performance. We talk about food and optimal performance on the field because it does matter. When we talk about beverage water consumption, we talk about how that can enhance what they're doing, or how food or beverage can also negatively impact what they're doing. So their own program is a little bit different from the younger ones. And to your question on if starting early is better, yes, we believe that they're very impressionable at those younger age. And also they have a aptitude for knowledge. They're always trying to get more information. They're very curious. So leveraging that curiosity and helping them to understand the science, the why behind the recommendations we're making is very important. And that's why we're approaching it that way.
Excellent. And it's interesting how you talk about with high school kids, it's almost like a whole shift in what you deliver and how you engage them. And I love the idea of that if an athlete is thinking of high performance, how you can tie that to the food, like
Mhm.
water and good food. Or if you don't eat well, that could impact your performance. Because I think sometimes that association is not that clear for kids, or they
Mhm.
feel very young and their body kind of maybe is more comfortable taking maybe not the healthiest food than say maybe for some older people. Now, international schools are all over the world, and as in your context in the United States, it's a multicultural school. You have kids from all over, different eating habits. How do schools, what would you say to schools? How do you kind of balance those different needs? Because of course you might have some Muslim children, you might have some Jewish children, Hindi children, vegetarian or vegan, and certain kids can't eat this and that. What is the thing that you're noticing schools are doing to kind of accommodate that complexity?
Yes, that's very, very important because culture and beliefs really shape how we eat. Now, one of the key things about this is, of course, a lot of schools do not address this issue. Some of them just they talk about food generally, but do not go into specifics. One of the things that we do, though, is coming in from an angle that is universal to all. So when it comes to science and the human physiology, the bioactive compounds you find in food and the human physiology, it cuts across all cultures because the human physiology is the same regardless of what you believe in terms of your religious beliefs or your cultural beliefs. If you hit this plate of a full plate of vegetables, or if your diet is richer in fruits and vegetables, this is the outcome you will expect. If you eat fruits and vegetables, this is how it will interact with your digestive system. If you eat more fruits and vegetables, this is how it will interact with your body on a molecular level. If you eat, so it's pretty much bringing science into the conversation to explain the different foods. Now, for us, one of the things that's very important is making sure representation matters. So making sure that children see themselves in all our products, whether it's just a creative a flyer that we design or it's in a video animation, whatever we do, we want people, the children, to see themselves in those materials. So that's very important. And then when it comes down to the content, the core content, we focus more on the science of it. We use examples that cuts across different meal types and different cultures to explain the point, but we do not talk down on any particular food types, or we could just explain to them why some may not be beneficial and why some will be beneficial. So that is really our focus, leveraging science to explain food and health outcomes to the next generation.
I love that the fact is that our bodies and food and the way the science, our physiology, as you were saying, the molecules and the way our digestive system, it doesn't matter where you come from, it's all the
Mhm.
same. And it's kind of the neutral ground.
Yeah,
There can be no politics here
never
because
did.
it's biology. And I love that approach about science because then you kind of mitigate this whole issue is like, well, my culture doesn't eat that, my culture doesn't eat that, and the conversation is really not at that level. It's about this is the science, our body needs that or doesn't need that.
Mhm.
When you visit schools, you were talking, I mean, a really interesting statistic that generally you need about 40 hours of food education or nutrition education to really have a behavioral change. And nowadays it's about 8. What has happened? Why has suddenly food education gone from 40 hours to 8 hours, and I'm actually in international schools. It's usually tied to health and wellness. Of course, in science, you're going to get some. But I'm wondering, why have schools suddenly forgotten about the importance of food?
Well, the reports that we have has not really shown a time, at least in the US. I really do not know much about some other countries at this time, but at least in the US, we don't have reports showing that it's ever been at that level of 40. But what the CDC was proposing is that it should be at that level. That's the recommendation, but it's not there. It's really far from it. Uh, there are also some studies that published that there was a time that food education was more of a priority, nutrition education actually was more of a priority in schools than it is now. And one of the key things that they attribute to people cutting back on some things is really some things, especially when it comes to nutrition education, is because priorities shifted more to reading and math and performance on test because some of the metrics are being measured. So people are focusing more on that. And now, because of some of the experiences we've had in the past few years, especially during the pandemic, conversation is coming back to saying, okay, how can we improve health outcomes in our communities? What is the role of food? How can we reduce the burden of obesity and all the health-related research challenges that come with that? So the conversation is shifting back to focus on health and saying what we can do to improve health outcomes in communities.
So when you see this refocus on the body, you're talking about how it's important not to talk about the types of foods, but that about the science and the biology. How are teachers finding this approach? And how are kids reacting to it? So it's a more of a science narrative. Of course, you have gamification, you have engaging activities, there's parent resources. But when you go into schools, what generally is the initial reaction from the kids and the teachers?
Okay. Yes. So one of the key things with teachers is the teachers love it. They love the fact that they have things they can assign to students to do that will expand on what they are teaching. So, for instance, a lot of time when teachers are preparing for a topic, to teach a topic, they're thinking of different things they can integrate into their lesson that will help reinforce the concept they want them to learn and enhance their learning experience. So having a resource that can help them take that knowledge and apply it to things around them, making it more memorable for them and also making it more applicable for them is something teachers embrace. Also, it's saving them time. So the time they will spend looking for resources and all, they don't have to do that. They just assign it to the students. But one of the things teachers have been telling us is the excitement around having a technology integration in their learning experience, especially something that has a social component to it. They can chat with their peers, they can get feedback, that they love it. But one particular one really stood out to me. It just said, "Oh, even the poor performing students, the students are not motivated about schoolwork, got really excited and did really well using the platform." So we realized that different things appeal to different groups. So the teachers see this as a tool that makes learning easier for their students and makes their work easier as well. The students see it as, oh, this is really fun for us. This is something we love coming into the classroom. So think about it. If you think back on when you were in elementary school, most likely if you look around your classroom, nobody had a mobile phone or a device. And I know when I was in elementary school, nobody had a mobile phone, nobody had a tablet. But if you ask someone in sixth grade today, how many people in your class has a mobile phone? You won't be surprised to say this if he or she says everyone. That is the generation we are dealing with. They are tech savvy. Some of them have been handling technology since they were 3 months, since they could hold anything. So seeing technology in their classroom is exciting for them. It's more like you're speaking their language, and we see that also as part of future of learning too.
Do you think that what kids are exposed to about food through social media, and there's been a lot of talk with anorexia, bulimia, and some of the habits that come about and the way social media pushes it, and also the companies, the Coca-Colas, the Pepsis, all. How do you navigate that with kids? What would you suggest as parents or teachers when that exposure and they're seeing that in social media in their home context? How do you address that in a way that they can start developing an appreciation and maybe being more of a critical thinker around that topic?
Yes. So one of the things about information, especially in this social media age that we're in, is being intentional about sharing accurate information. So we can't stop the people that are sharing the wrong information and misinforming people, but we can counter that by sharing facts. So, one of the key things that I strongly believe, and one of the things that I advocate for, is having more experts step out of their comfort zone and educate people. Because when we that have the information step up and we start talking more, people will start listening. And the only way you can counter ignorance is through knowledge. Share and share and share. So the more we share, the more people know, and then they start pointing out the wrong ones. Like, okay, no, that is not accurate. That can be true because they're now informed. And I believe that starting from the schools, helping students learn in the school environment so that they're not just change makers for themselves, they're change makers in community. So when they see things that are not the way it should be, they can speak up and say, no, that is not right. No, that is not the way it should be. That is a very important part of uh, um, approaching and handling misinformation that we see around us today.
I love the idea of sharing and expanding that sharing and kind of leveraging the algorithms to make sure that your share gets a lot of likes and
Mhm.
countering it. I think your point's a really important one. To misinformation sometimes is best dealt by giving correct information,
Information,
countering
right?
it, than trying to stop it. Before we start recording, we talked a bit about also cultures, and you were saying that the approach that your organization based in the United States is very different than maybe what you would see in the developing world and the approach there to support children. Maybe you can talk to us a bit about the differences when you think about food education, depending the context, geographic context, and what makes sense and doesn't make sense.
Right. So, yeah, it's very important to understand the pain points. So, what are the pain points in our society today? So, the pain points children are dealing with in the US is quite different from pain points that children in some developing countries are dealing with. So, if you're looking for a solution for obesity, for instance, in US schools and trying to provide educational resources for those schools, because 20% of the students are obese, then the same solution might not be exactly what you need to present in a developing country. You might need to modify things a little bit. Maybe if you're going to a developing country where a lot of the children are dealing with hunger and malnutrition. While you want to educate them about the science of food and health, you might want to think about how you can partner with some nonprofits that can actually deliver food to those kids. So they're eating and they're learning because they can only learn when they have food in their stomach. So it's very important to see what the need is in any community and design a product that will be a good solution for them.
And one of the things that you keep bringing up, we've had this percentage 20% obesity. Talk to us a bit about obesity in children. What have you noticed, and how much is the home environment, or is it the cultural environment? Is it economic? What are some of the factors that are seeing the obesity? And we're talking in this context of the United States, but I know in a lot of Western countries there are issues of obesity or very developed countries issues of obesity. So
Yes. Yes, so happy to talk about that. So obesity is really a big challenge, and it's bigger than just BMIs and weight gain and things like that, because uh, people that are obese, children or adults that are obese, are at risk of different diseases. So it's something that public health experts talk about a lot, with the goal of looking for solutions to the problem. Now, when you think about why are we here, what are some of the factors that have contributed to the huge numbers that we have today? Well, culture and habits have changed over time. So, especially the habits. So, you have, like I mentioned before, children that really tech savvy, spend a lot of time on the couch, playing video games and playing or entertaining themselves in different ways. So the and while they're doing it, they're not just doing that. There's a very higher level or increased consumption of discretionary snacks, so like chips and sugary beverages, and all those things combined together. The reduced activity, increase in discretionary snacks, and sugary beverage consumption, all those factors come together, contribute to higher obesity numbers. Of course, that's not the case for everyone. There are also some um, cases here in the US where you have people that live in areas where we call food deserts, where they do not have access to grocery stores, and they have more of corner stores, and so they can, it's very easy for them to walk down the road and grab a bag of chips than go to the farmers market and get a bag of fruits. So those are some of the things that also contribute to that. Accessibility issues are some of the things that also contribute to the way people eat. But when people are informed and they know that this thing is really, really important, they go the extra mile. So if I have to take a train to the next town to get a bag of fruits, or if I have to take a train or a bus or a drive down, whatever you need to do to go that extra mile, you do it because you know how important it is. So different angles to the problem, but the solution with regards to being educated about the benefits and how food interacts with your body is very, very important across the board.
So, you talked about the increase in discretionary snacks and sweet drinks. Once kids get kind of hooked on these foods, is it an addiction? Is it an issue of addiction, or is it really just changing diet, or is the sugar and the salt and all the other things that are in there to keep you coming back quite challenging to fight and then switch to something like you were saying, fruits or some healthy vegetables?
So yeah, there's a pattern of, okay, there's people derive pleasure from this way of eating, but one thing I strongly believe is the moment you understand what you're doing to yourself, because a lot of time people don't really know. So for instance, I was talking to someone yesterday, and she was referring to how some people on specific diets, uh, unintentionally, of course, they stay on that diet for a while, and gradually over time they build up plaques in their blood vessels because they've unintentionally, well, based on the way they eat, they've increased over time their cholesterol level, and because they've maintained this body physiology for a while, the outcomes start revealing itself in subtle ways in their blood vessels and other parts of the body. So of course, when people understand that, oh, so there's a connection between what I eat and the way I feel, it's not immediate. It's not like, oh, I had a bag of chips then. No, it's something that builds up over time. So the earlier you know, the earlier you start making those intelligent choices and healthier choices, the better the outcomes down the line will be. So what I believe is educating children, helping them know that, yeah, this thing is tasty, and but what is also important to know that this is how it affects you, whether it's a salty snack, or it's a sugary beverage, or it's a meal that's very rich in different, very very rich in different compounds and particles that do not help. It's important for them to know and understand why we say it doesn't help. One is very common is we tell children what to do. We tell them, eat this, eat that, and which is good. They're not telling them anything, but coupling that with explaining to them, this is why this is not good for you. This is why this is beneficial to you. Will go a long way to drive positive action or desirable action in that regard. So yeah, that's
When you're talking about that, and it is so important as you describe this, is that, once you have this information and with this information can make connections intrinsically to yourself. So I understand, okay, I ate a bag of chips. It's not going to do anything immediately.
mm,
But if I keep doing that long term through the education and the information, you're quickly going to build this awareness. I'm
mhm.
wondering how much do parents influence, because some kids, are quite fussy about what they eat. And what is the dynamic of how parents see food and interact with food on the relationship with children and food?
Very important, very very important. Because if you think about the dynamics in the family, the first form of education these children receive is from their parents. What they like, what they enjoy, it all boils down to what they're exposed to. Because right from when they are, from inception, from birth, the parents nurture them, and then the first foods they're introduced to is what they embrace. And it's after some time that they start thinking, oh, I don't like that. I like that, start making choices. But before it gets to that point, they've already been exposed to so many different types of foods. So parents play a very, very strong role in the food choices children make because number one, they are the first set of people that will expose them to different foods. Number two, they make the decision of what comes into the home and what doesn't. And if it doesn't come into the home, the kids don't have the option to eat it, of course, until they're much older. And also, when it comes to what they even eat in the cafeteria, parents play a role in that as well. Parents will say, oh, you're not eating the cafeteria. I don't like what they serve. You go home with packed lunch or you go to school with packed lunch. So parents are very, very powerful when it comes to shaping the perspective, the choices, and the outcomes that children have. So that's why when we're designing Food Niche-Ed, we thought about parents and we integrated some resources for parents as well because we know the role they play.
It's yeah, and it's so interesting as you say, what parents expose kids to, the type of foods on the table. If they're always eating potato chips and drinking sugary drinks, that becomes the point of reference, and then kids kind of see that as the cultural norm in the context of the family. Do you think we become fussier eaters because of abundance? Is abundance the problem?
I think fussy and picky eaters, it's something, it's a preference, it's a thing of preference. Like for me, I know as a child, I was a very picky eater. And I just had a preference of specific food types. And I wish I could tell you that if they were good food options, but no, not really, because growing up, my dad worked for a dairy company, was an executive with a dairy company. So we had a very good supply of ice cream, yogurt, and all that. It was, and I was very, very confident to just help myself to it as much as possible. So, one of the things I realized, of course, going back to what we said earlier on, that parents play a very important role in this. For me, I didn't know much. I just felt I'd rather have this. My mom, however, my mom is a nurse. She's a retired nurse now, but she was always saying, "No, you are what you eat. So you need to make this choice." So she's always coming in from that angle of trying to steer me in a different direction and just trying to encourage me to eat my vegetables and eat proper food. Because the thing is, when you eat all these sugary drinks and food and all that, you lose your appetite for the real thing. And you feel like going back to that. So I strongly believe, number one, that yes, there is a trend with foods that once you're exposed to some, you feel like having more of that. But in terms of how picky we are and affluence, I feel the affluence around us does shape a bit of that as well. Because if kids are hungry, you really don't care what is placed in front of you; you just eat. But I also believe that even though there's a lot around us and a lot of food, and it's affordable and it's within reach, we can still make better choices when we know more about the benefits that's locked in food. I remember one thing a pediatrician said once. She said, okay, so a parent was telling her that, oh, my child, she doesn't eat well. She said she hears that a lot from parents. But the truth is, when a child says, no, I don't want that, parents give the child like 16 other options on what they can eat. And then they complain that, oh, this child is not eating. That kids need to learn hunger. She said, when she said it, I just laughed because she just meant that if the child is not hungry, then it doesn't matter what we have on the table. They're not going to eat it. But when they are, they're more open to not pushing people keeping their kids hungry. But she just
Yeah,
made that
yeah.
comment. So,
No,
affluence,
I think it's a really important point because when you go into the grocery store, there are like 50 different biscuits, there are 19 different cereals.
yeah.
The abundance and and when you read the labels, the amount of sugar and cornstarch. So I think, generally many of our processed foods are not that great.
Mm.
How many I'm just curious, are you seeing in your work kids gravitating to veganism or vegetarianism? Is there a greater move, parents promoting that with their kids? And what's your thought about that?
Right. So I personally believe that uh, when it comes to food choices and overall, yeah, food choices, having more fruits and vegetables is definitely a huge plus. That is something we encourage. Now, in terms of protein sources, there's a lot of young people that are gravitating more towards animal-free options. And when we think about sustainability challenges that we're facing today, of course, there is a need to reduce our dependence on animals as our primary source of protein. Not ruling out the fact that protein is also very important for full physiological function and our overall well-being. But where does that protein come from is a question that a lot of people are doing a lot of work and research to answer and provide products that uh, can be a source of protein, a nourishing source of protein to people that is not fully dependent on animals. So we see things like plant-based burgers or cultured meat, cultured sushi. You see also products, cultured, we see almond milk. So different products are coming to the marketplace and people are embracing them more and more as they learn more about these products. So my when it comes to my perspective on plant-based food and plant-based option, I think more in terms of increasing your consumption of all foods, fruits, vegetables, grains, leafy greens, as much as possible. Now, when it comes to your source of protein, I believe protein is essential, and your source of protein, choosing your source of protein in a way that is sustainable is also a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we're all realizing that the sustainability of the planet and food is a huge issue. When you go into schools, are schools reaching out to you or are you working with schools? And when schools reach out to you, is it usually because there's a crisis or is it more curiosity? Or are you having schools with big obesity problems? What are kind of the profiles of schools that are approaching you and what is their motivation to coming to you?
Right. So, different categories. We have teachers that do reach out. The principals and school administrators. We just went for a partner fair with the City of New York, which is really pushing food education because they see
Oh,
the
interesting.
crisis. They see the problems and they know that we can do something about this. So, yes, there are different approaches. Some are really based on the community leaders seeing the need and saying we need to do something, we need to bring partners on board to tackle this issue that we see in our communities. And then we have others that we reach out to and say, hey, we can support you, we can partner with you to solve or to enhance education in your classroom. And the approach we take is not taking them away from what they're doing currently, it's helping them leverage technology and our resources to enhance science education in their classroom, making it more engaging, making it more applicable, making it more impactful. That is our goal. And that's how we work with them.
And I like the word that you use, applicable. So, really making those connections that are intrinsic, making those connections with day to day life, habits, and what I'm doing, and seeing, understanding the science. And I think, for a lot of kids, they study science, and I haven't studied science in a long time, but I would imagine that rarely are we talking about, oh, you have a sugary drink and now you have a natural fruit juice, and what is kind of the journey and the molecular experience within your body. I'm wondering, do you think science does not focus on food in schools generally, or is that wrong in my assumption?
Right. So they actually we have what we call the next generation science curriculum here in the US that really enhance is focused on helping make science very, very applicable. They will tell you about projects that they should do and things that they should do to reinforce learning. But and some of this, if you look at the science curriculum here, well, let me focus on New York, for instance. If you look at science curriculum, you see areas of overlap where they talk about food production and agriculture, which is also a very good place to help kids know where their food comes from, help them connect with food. And then you go on to talk about digestion. Digestion, whether you live in the US or you live in South Africa, it doesn't matter where you live. The concept of digestion goes about talking about the food you eat, what happens to the food you eat in your mouth, and how does it get into your cells to energize your cells and help you have enough to do whatever you have to do. So bringing that concept, science concept that is being taught in class, but now opening their eyes to see, no, 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 that's not something abstract, something out there. It's actually something that happens every day. When you sit at the table, you make a choice to eat. When you digest the food, it's broken down. It goes into your digestive system, and then it goes into your blood. It doesn't just stay in your digestive system, or it doesn't just go out as waste. It goes into your blood, and it can either enrich or otherwise, depending on what you are eating. So there's some compounds we find in food. This is how they enrich you. This is how they add value to you. So science is just a tool, in my opinion, helping us to understand the world around us. Whether we want to talk about food, or want to talk about the climate, or want to talk about anything we want to talk about, science helps us to understand it. So it's just bringing it down to their level. So we use short animation videos to help take those concepts from just a simple concept taught in class to something they can relate with, something they see around them. And then we give them activity prompts that they can take home and work on with their parents. So we go from food safety to food production to food digestion to food and health, the entire spectrum from the beginning, where it's production, to outcomes, health outcomes. We take them on that journey, and that's what FoodNiche-ED is focused on.
So what I love is the idea that the kids are in a school context learning about food, and then there's some prompts, and then these activities that they can bring home. So the conversation continues in the
Mhm.
home environment.
Mhm.
Do you think, because if we think of international schools, the socioeconomic situation is always, there's a fair amount of prosperity in the community of international schools. Is food habit tied to socioeconomics? Do you think people, the wealthier part of the world, is eating better?
I wish I could say yes, but that's not the case. At least going by some of the data that's been collected by epidemiologists and people that study this community, more like people that study obesity and some of the health outcomes that are related with it. So it's not that, okay, US, for instance, is a very prosperous country. And if we're going by that metrics of the more affluent a country is, the healthier they are, then US should be, if not the healthiest country, then very close to being the healthiest. So that is not really the situation here. I think there are a lot of other things that come into play apart from socioeconomic status. Now, I wouldn't downplay socioeconomic status because if you have, you can make better choices. If you are informed and you know the benefits of it, having the resources to do so is also important. So that's where socioeconomic status come into the conversation, and but that's not the only thing. I feel very strongly, based on some of the information we've gathered so far, that there are other factors that come into play when it comes to this issue. And one of the biggest one is people knowing. People knowing is more like a foundation. Knowing one thing, knowing what the benefits, what the knowing in great details actually, because you might know just somehow you have an idea that this is good for me, but knowing beyond, I have an idea. It's like, okay, yeah, this is how this affects me. Just think about it. When someone goes to the doctor and they tell you, okay, this is the health challenge you're having, you might reduce your lifespan by X amount of years if you continue this way. In another 4 or 5 years, this is what will happen. You need to change your diet so that you don't have to be on this medication and this. You'll be surprised how quickly and how disciplined people can be when they know the risk that is with the current habits that they've built. So the same thing here, even though it's not that urgent. By that I mean, uh, the doctor is not saying directly to you, you have X number of years. It is very equally important to know that we are building up to something. Every habit we adopt and we stick to is building up to something. It could be something really good, and it could be the opposite. So it boils down to knowing how important your choices are and also knowing what works for you in terms of, okay, this is where I am today and I can increase this. I think everybody can increase their fruit and vegetable consumption. People can go for okay, I think I was telling my husband yesterday, I said, I love the way I feel after I eat a bag of not immediately after, but just down the line. I have nuts, I mix nuts with dried blueberries and walnuts. And I just had that snack on Sunday, and Monday morning I was saying that I felt my digestive system felt the impact of my snacking over the weekend. And I was just describing that, and I was looking up some things while we talked about it. That was just a personal experience. People have different experiences, but the food we eat, whether it's a snack or it's a meal, does impact our health outcomes. And when we make those choices that work for us consistently over time, we reap the benefits of it too. So that education is key.
Absolutely. And it's so nice to hear that that is the theme and the arc that you've been sharing is how can we turn, that information, the more informed we are, the better knowledge we have and understanding the impact of habits, be them positive or negative, long term. Well, Julia, thank you so much. It's just been fascinating to talk about this topic. We usually ask our guests at the very end if you had to give a piece of advice or a little guidance to teachers and school leaders regarding
Mhm.
food. There's one thing you want them to walk away with and just reflect upon after hearing you sharing all this wonderful knowledge and wisdom on this topic. What would it be?
Well, I want them to walk away with the fact that they are change makers. Teachers influence the next generation in a more powerful way than they know. And it would be good for them to play a very big role in influencing a healthier future for these young ones by helping them to know that they can make change happen. they can shape their future by making healthier choices today. They can shape a better future by making healthier food choices today.
Thank you so much. And I want to remind our audience, as always, Julia has shared some show notes. You can read her biography, and there's some links and also on social media. And again, it's FoodNiche-EDU. And definitely do spend some time on the website. It's really interactive, and they're really resources which I found so nice that transcend school. They also are things for the home. And so appreciate you sharing your wisdom. Again, show notes, go over there and check out some of the resources that have been shared, and it might be a good jumping point for these important conversations. Again, to our audience, thank you for those that keep joining us on LinkedIn. We really appreciate it. And also, a lot of you are very generous in sharing and commenting as you share out to your own professional learning network. And we greatly appreciate your support. And Julia, thank you so much for being on the International School Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.